There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?"
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And now your host, Stephen Hanks.
You know, I love listening to those snippets of iconic speeches from famous patriotic progressives. Just never gets old. Good morning to all of you out there in Sedona and throughout the Verde Valley, listening right now on this September 7th, 2024, through KAZM 106.5 FM and 780 AM Mellow Mountain Radio. Like the announcer said, my name is Stephen Hanks, and this show, which is heard every Saturday morning at 8 a.m., is called The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And I also want to welcome folks from all over Arizona and around the country who may be tuning into the live stream on mellowmountainradio.com, and anyone who is listening to the podcast version on Apple or Amazon Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. You know, folks, as many weekend morning KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio listeners in Sedona and the Verde Valley area know, I host another show on this station called Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, which, by the way, you can hear every Saturday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. Get that plug in. And on that show, I offer a segment called Stephen Sedona Scene, where I tell my listeners about some of the more interesting events happening in the area over the following week. Well, on this show this morning, I'm going to offer a short Stephen's political scene because there are a couple of big events over the next couple of weeks sponsored by the Democrats of the Red Rocks, otherwise known as DOOR, of which I am a proud member. So I just wanted you to know about these two big events coming up. So 1 week from tomorrow, Sunday, September 15th, from 1:30 to 4 p.m., DOOR is holding what has become an annual Meet the Candidates picnic at the Hub at Posse Grounds. At this event, you'll be able to hear from a slew of Democratic officials and 2024 Democratic candidates, including, and it's a top-notch guest list, Arizona's Secretary of State Adrian Fontes is going to come all the way to Sedona to meet the people. Former CD2 Congressman Tom O'Halloran, who lost his seat because of redistricting. Arizona CD2 candidate Jonathan Nez, who is running against Republican Congressman Eli Crane. Yavapai Board of Supervisors District 3 candidate Nikki Check, who won her primary at the end of July. Corporation Commission candidates Eulania Aguilar, Jonathan Hill, and Joshua Polachek. Yavapai County Supreme Court Judge candidate Danilyn Savage. Clean slate for democracy candidates Mike Fogel for the state Senate and Jay Ruby and Marcia Smith for the state assembly. And last but not least, Sedona Mayor Scott Jablow, who in the July primary was elected to his second term. Tickets are $20 online and $25 at the door, no pun intended. For more information and to purchase tickets online, go to democratsoftheredrocks.org/DOOR, DORR, not DOOR, _events. That's democratsoftheredrocks.org/DORR_events. Then on Friday, September 20th at 9:30 a.m., DOOR sponsors another of its monthly educational breakfasts, in person or on Zoom. If you go in person, it's at the Sedona Community Center at 2615 Melody Lane in West Sedona. And as we're honing in on Election Day in 2 months and early balloting is about to begin in early October, this will also be a Meet the Candidates get-together. Both Jonathan Nez and Nikki Check will also be at this event, along with Timothy Stringham, Democratic candidate for Maricopa County Reporter. And there is a $10 donation per person, and coffee, tea, and light refreshments will be served. For more information on this meeting and to get the breakfast Zoom link, which you need to get in if you're going to Zoom it, again, go to democratsoftheredrocks.org/DORR_events. So I hope a lot of you in my listening audience will go to one or both of those events. And by the way, the picnic is really fun every year. So folks, there are no guests today, so I'll be flying solo for the next hour. And I can sincerely hope I can keep you engaged on the national and local political scene at a time when we're just 2 months away from the most important presidential election, not only of our lifetimes, but perhaps in the history of the country. And I know a lot of people say that about every election. This time, it couldn't be more true. And people who don't understand why this is the most important presidential election in our nation's history just haven't been paying attention. I'd like to start today's show. And by the way, even though I don't have any guests in the studio or on the phone, I'm going to be quoting a number of people, pundits and columnists, political columnists I admire who have been commenting on the news in various platforms. So it'll be kind of like I'll have pseudo guests. So it's not just going to be me talking. I'll be quoting people. So I'd like to start today's show by telling you about Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who was born in 1919 and died in 2021. So he had a very long life. Ferlinghetti was an American beat poet, a painter, a fiction author, and a social activist. His second poetry collection, Coney Island of the Mind, and I know Coney Island well, being a Brooklynite, was translated into 9 languages and sold more than 1 million copies. When he turned 100 in March of 2019, the city of San Francisco honored him with a Lawrence Ferlinghetti Day. In 2007, Ferlinghetti wrote the poem Pity the Nation, which was a variation of a poem of the same title by early 20th century Lebanese-American poet and philosopher Khalil Gibran. Gibran's version of Pity the Nation, that was published in 1933, 2 years after his death in 1931. So Gibran wrote his original version during the Great Depression, the year before Franklin Roosevelt was elected president. Ferlinghetti wrote his version towards the end of the presidency of George W. Bush and a year before the election of Barack Obama. If these words remind us that history is cyclical, they would apply to the period of American history we are living through right now. And this is what Lawrence Ferlinghetti wrote. Pity the nation whose people are sheep and whose shepherds mislead them. Pity the nation whose leaders are liars, whose sages are silenced, and whose bigots haunt the airwaves. Pity the nation that raises not its voice except to praise conquerors, and acclaim the bully as hero and aims to rule the world by force and by torture. Pity the nation that knows no other language but its own and no other culture but its own. Pity the nation whose breath is money and sleeps the sleep of the too well-fed. Pity the nation, oh, pity the people who allow their rights to erode and their freedoms to be washed away. My country, tears of thee, sweet land of liberty. And folks, if I could add an addendum to this poem, add a couplet, if you will, it would be this. Pity the nation willing to sacrifice its freedom of the press for power, prestige, and profit. And I added that little addition to Mr. Ferlinghetti's Pity the Nation poem because I have never been as disappointed and disillusioned by our national mainstream media as I have been during the Donald Trump era, especially during the coverage of this presidential campaign. And that's saying something because the coverage of the 2016 campaign was incredibly awful in its own right. And this particularly affects me personally because I spent my career in magazine publishing as an editor and a writer. So I've been in the media on a number of levels. So what's been going on really affects me. Two once iconic newspapers, the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the supposedly even-handed national cable news network CNN, have been both citing coverage of this campaign to death and revealing a total double standard in how they report on the Democrats. First Joe Biden and now Kamala Harris versus their reporting of Donald Trump. I don't know how anyone can read or watch the coverage of these campaigns and not realize that the mainstream news media that has become totally dependent on ratings and clicks will normalize and maintain Donald Trump's viability in this race so that they can perpetuate the drama of the election until the very last day vote is cast. There were infinitely more stories and headlines about Joe Biden's age and flaws in his delivery of speeches and statements than there were about Trump. And now you have the media badgering Kamala Harris to grant them interviews. But she's ignoring them because she knows they will do what Dana Bash of CNN did in that one interview last week. Frame questions to her using Republican and Trump talking points, and Kamala Harris is just not having it. You might have heard about Trump's appearance Thursday at the New York Economic Club, where he uttered a totally incoherent word salad, more like a word smorgasbord, in answer to a policy question about how he might solve the rising cost of health care. Both the Associated Press and Politico reported that with headlines that made it sound like Trump gave very rational answers. Donald Trump and his campaign do or say something almost every day that should be disqualifying, but the mainstream media, as they have done for 9 years with Donald Trump, keeps reporting that the naked emperor wears a beautiful suit of clothes. And this is where I want to quote one of my non-present guests. This was written by Rebecca Solnit in The Guardian, the Guardian U.S. edition, about the way the media has been covering Donald Trump in the campaign. And I quote, "The first thing to say about the hate and scorn currently directed at the mainstream media, the mainstream U.S. media, is that they worked hard to earn it. They've done so by failing repeatedly, determinedly, spectacularly to do their job, which is to maintain their independence, inform the electorate, and speak truth to power. While the left has long had reasons to dismiss centrist media, and the right has loathed it most when it did do its job well, the moderates who are furious at it now seem to be something new, and a host of former editors, media experts, and independent journalists have been going hard after them this summer." She continues, "Centrist political reformer and columnist Norm Ornstein states that these news institutions, quote, have had no reflection, no willingness to think through how irresponsible and reckless so much of our mainstream press and so many of our journalists have been and continue to be. Most voters, he says, have no clue what a second Trump term would actually be like. Instead, we get the same insipid focus on the horse race and the polls while normalizing abnormal behavior and treating this like a typical presidential election, not one that is an existential threat to democracy. And then Rebecca continues, it's hard to gloat over the decline of these dinosaurs of American media when a free press and a well-informed electorate are both crucial to democracy. The alternatives to the major news outlets simply don't reach enough readers and listeners, though the nonprofit investigative outfit ProPublica, which was the media organization that broke all the Clarence Thomas corruption scandals, and progressive magazines like as the New Republic and Mother Jones are doing a lot of the best reporting and commentary. And I would venture to add myself that some of the best reporting and commentary are by influencers commenting on the campaign on TikTok, of all things, which is a sad state of affairs if that's where the best news is coming out of. So now I want to switch focus. You know, whenever I try to put the show together on Thursdays when I know I'm going to be doing a show on Saturday. And invariably, I end up having to switch things up because things break on Friday. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, of course, the biggest national story this past week was yet another school shooting. This one at Appalachian High School in Georgia, where the shooter was a 14-year-old student of the school. Colt Gray and his father, Colin, have now both been charged in connection with the mass shooting that left 4 people dead, 2 students and 2 teachers, and 9 others wounded. Colt Gray was arraigned on 4 counts of felony murder and is expected to be tried as an adult. The father, Colin Gray, was arraigned on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. The arrest warrant alleges that he provided his son with a firearm, an AR-15 style assault rifle, with knowledge he was a threat to himself and others. Folks, can you actually believe that this child was investigated by local police a year ago for talking online about the desire to shoot up a school? Can you also believe that at the time the father told police that while he had rifles in the house, his son didn't have access to them? Yet in spite of all of that, this, quote, father, unquote, actually bought his son that assault rifle as a Christmas present. That's a present for a 14-year-old. By the way, the high-velocity ammunition shot by these types of weapons can shatter bone, but thousands are sold each year. And can you also believe that Georgia gun law prohibits minors from possessing handguns, but that there is no minimum age to possess a rifle or shotgun in Georgia? And just to give you an idea, and I think one of the gun safety organizations has rated Georgia, I think, 46th in the nation for the weakness of their gun safety laws. So here's just some of the things that are involved with gun laws or lack thereof in Georgia. There's no state permit required to purchase. There's no firearm registration. There's no assault weapon law. There's no magazine capacity restriction. There's no owner's license required. There's no permit required for concealed carry or open carry, and there's no background check required for private sales. According to a database maintained by the Associated Press and USA Today, in partnership with Northeastern University, that shooting in Georgia was the country's 30th mass killing this year. At least 131 people have died this year in those killings, which are defined as incidents in which 4 or more people die within a 24-hour period, not including the killer, the same definition used by the FBI. Last year, 2023, ended with 217 deaths from 42 mass killings in the U.S., making last year one of the deadliest years on record. I'd like to read you something I found yesterday on social media. This was tough. It was a memo that was shared by a teacher in Hamilton County in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the other day, less than 1 month into the school year. The note says, "Parents and Hamilton County neighbors, please help us as much as possible. On behalf of the educators working hard every day in Hamilton County to teach our children and ensure their safety." And then the teacher went through a list of incidents involving students, guns, and threats of violence. Oh my. Here's just a few of them. You're not going to believe this. On August 13th of this year, a note went out, "Firearm recovered and 2 students arrested after altercation at Howard High School on Tuesday." On August 19th, Hickson Middle School student arrested for making threat. On August 25th, student arrested in connection with threat against Red Bank High School. The next day, students arrested for threats against East Hamilton High School and Brown Middle School. The next day after that, August 27th, gun recovered and student arrested at Howard, student arrested at Chattanooga Preparatory School. On the 28th, student at Central High School arrested for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. On September 3rd, firearm recovered and student arrested at East Hamilton Middle School. September 4th, Ivy Academy student arrested for threat against Chattanooga School for the Arts and Sciences. September 5th, Hamilton County responds to threats against Hunter Middle School and student arrested. And the same day, Soddy Daisy Middle School parent arrested for threats of mass violence. That's in one county in Tennessee over less than a month period after the beginning of the school year. It's just out of control, folks. If you want to talk about the firearms laws in Arizona, there are things like you don't need a concealed carry permit to have a gun in your car in Arizona. Anyone that is 21 years old and can legally purchase or own a firearm can conceal carry in their car. Arizona repealed its concealed weapons permit requirement in 2010. And according to the Gabby Giffords Law Center, in 2021, Arizona had the 18th highest gun rate among the states. So obviously Arizona is one of the many states in the country that is big on guns, and that's why there is more than one gun out there for everyone in a population of around 330 million people. And what is the main argument people who don't support any gun control or gun safety laws rally around? The sacrosanct Second Amendment of the Constitution, which is without question the most misunderstood, misinterpreted, and miscategorized article of the Bill of Rights. Now, I could spend an entire show making the case that the reason the Founding Fathers decided to give a very high priority to the supposed right to bear arms was because we had just fought a bloody war against England for independence, and there was every reason to believe that England or some other European power could wage war on America again, and the new government would need to call on a, quote, well-regulated militia. I don't think that Washington and Jefferson and Adams and company created the Second Amendment so the citizens of a new nation could rise up and attack the government if it thought it was becoming too powerful. The Second Amendment has always been misinterpreted by gun fetishists and Second Amendment zealots who don't care how many mass shootings happen in this country as long as the gun manufacturers are placated and they can keep as many of their precious instruments of violence as they like. Now, on a show on Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, I had a guest one week who teaches gun safety classes, which is a good thing if you're going to own a gun. It's good to be safe with them and know how to use them. But in preparation for that show, I came up with, based on the extreme level of gun violence, I came up with a list of 15 top gun laws that if I was president and could be a dictator on day one, as our pathological lying sociopathic former president says he'd be if he's elected again, God forbid, these are the laws I would pass. And there's 15 of them, but I'm going to pare it down a little bit. 1, national gun ownership at age 21. Federal law sets a dangerously low minimum age for buying firearms. And while the law requires a person to be 21 to purchase a handgun from a licensed firearm dealer, it only requires a person to be 18 to buy a long gun, including an assault weapon from a dealer. I would impose universal background checks on federal and state levels. There would be gun licensing and registration. There would be a 30-day waiting period. There would be an ammunition sales database. I would eliminate permitless carry and open carry laws. There would be a banning of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. I would eliminate the private gun sale loopholes. I would close the bump stock loophole, and bump stocks are those gun stocks that can be used to assist in bump firing, which is the act of using the recoil of a semi-automatic firearm to fire ammunition cartridges in rapid succession. I would institute red flag laws, which is a gun violence prevention law that permits a state court to order a temporary removal of firearms from a person who they believe may present a danger to others or themselves, and should have been used in the case of this 14-year-old in Georgia, because the FBI actually investigated him a year ago because he was making threats to shoot up schools online. There should be new gun storage laws. So gun owners have to make their homes and communities safer and protect children and adults from unintended shootings and gun suicides by storing their guns locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition. I would make the creation of ghost guns, those guns you make with 3D printers, illegal. And I would impose liability insurance for gun owners and repeal the law that shields gun manufacturers from civil liability. And here's the thing everyone in my listening audience should understand. If every single one of those 15 laws I just listed were enacted, it wouldn't prevent anyone under the age of 21 from their precious right to bear a firearm. Would it be difficult and take longer? Yes, but it might not take you any longer than it does to get a learner's permit and a driver's license and insurance to drive a car. Now, that was a mouthful. I actually wasn't planning on doing a whole gun safety riff this early in the Patriotic Progressives history, but, when something happens in the news, you got to run with it. So I'm going to catch my breath and take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you a little story about how I'm actually sponsoring today's show and perhaps all the Patriotic Progressive shows for the month of September. But we'll be back in a little bit.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Hello, Sedona and Verde Valley. Stephen Hanks here. On my next episode of Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, my special guest will be Patrick Swice, the executive director of the Sedona International Film Festival. Patrick will tell us all about the films and programs at the festival theaters this fall season. So tune in on Saturday morning, September 7th at 10 a.m. for Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks, only on KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio.
You're listening to The Patriotic Progressive, for truth, justice, and the democratic way. And now your host, Stephen Hanks.
We are back. I was able to take a couple of sips of water, which I definitely needed after that long monologue. So thank you for queuing that up, Ryan. I really appreciate everything that my producer in the booth, Ryan Thompson, does for both of my shows. So I'm actually kind of sponsoring my own show today and maybe for the next few weeks, and I'll tell you how that's going to work. It's a story, and I'll try to do the shorter version as possible. So, Russia attacked Ukraine in February of 2022. That's when this war started, which, by the way, was supposed to be over, I think Putin said, in 24, 48 hours. And here we are more than 2 years later. But anyway, going on 3. About a month after that war started, I noticed I'm on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, the social media site that's, for businesses mainly, for career professionals, I was apparently, and I didn't remember this, a member of one of these groups that LinkedIn has, these professional groups. And I was in a couple of groups that involve magazine publishing, and specifically children's magazine publishing. So one day I got this alert that somebody was looking at my profile. And when you find out that people have been looking at your profile, you get kind of curious, like, who is this person? So there was this one person who checked my profile, and I looked him up, and it turned out that he was a guy living in Ukraine, and he was a children's magazine publisher in Ukraine. So this really intrigued me. So I wrote him a message on LinkedIn and said, hey, I noticed you've been looking at my profile, that you're a children's publisher. I'm really sorry about what's happening in Ukraine, and I hope you're safe. And, just wanted to kind of make a pen pal connection, somebody who might be suffering in Ukraine. And then he wrote me back and told me that he was a publisher of children's magazines in Ukraine, and that his publishing operation had to stop with the war, obviously. But not only that, the Russian bombing attacks near where his offices were pretty much destroyed his entire archive and his office equipment, pretty much kind of shut down the operation. But he was intent, especially at this point where hundreds and hundreds of children in Ukraine were now orphans, to try to get that operation back up and running so he could print and publish magazines for children. And so this really affected me, and he contacted me with, the information on how to transfer funds. So I sent him some funds, which I was kind of amazed at how little amount of money it took for him to print like 1,000, 1,500 magazines. And so over time, we just kept writing back and forth, and him giving me updates on how close he was coming to get the magazines printed. And so I wanted to help him because what I could send him was never going to be enough. So I created a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for this Ukrainian children's magazine publisher so he could get his magazines printed. And I've got to tell you, what really touched me beyond belief over the last week is that Peter Peter Gartnick, which is his name, sent me 2 pictures of Ukrainian children standing in a library holding the magazine with signs saying, "Thank you, Stephen Hanks, for helping the children." It completely wiped me out. I ramped up the GoFundMe campaign. So I just wanted to mention, so I'm kind of sponsoring the show with that fundraising campaign. And if you want to help my friend Peter publish children's magazines for the children and the orphans of Ukraine while this war is going on, which is kind of incredible, go to the GoFundMe website and in the search, type in Ukraine Children's Magazines. And I wanted the first window on that page with the results, you'll see my fundraiser. And the reason why I'm saying type in Ukraine Children's Magazines is because the link is, too long and ridiculous. So I'm not going to read the 18,000 letters in the link. Just go in the search on GoFundMe, type in Ukraine Children's Magazines, and you'll see my campaign. And I'm not trying to raise like a ton of money. I think my goal right now is $1,500. So it shouldn't take that much more time to get there. So I hope you will help out as much as you can. Thanks for listening to that. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to try to do in upcoming episodes of the Patriotic Progressive leading up to this Saturday, right before Election Day. I'll be having as guests some of the Democratic candidates I mentioned earlier who are attending those Democrats of the Red Rocks events. I'll also be inviting some prominent political pundits to discuss the myriad dangers to the country of Project 2025. And I hope to offer my previews of the most significant national Senate races and my prediction on how the Electoral College will shake out on election night. And Ryan, the thought occurred to me, and you don't have to comment on this. I'm just, I think you'll get a kick out of what I'm about to say. Do you think that Chuck Helstein, our boss, might go for an election night party here in the studio? And I can comment all night on the returns live on KAZM Mellow Mountain Radio. I'm going to try to run that by him and see if that'll fly. So, but that means you'd have to be here all night. So I don't know if that'll work. He's smiling through the window. So just a little humor to break up the levity, Ryan. So, folks, I usually try to have, as I said before, I usually try to have each Saturday episode of this show mapped out by Thursday. And of course, since we're covering politics, especially during a presidential election year, some big news invariably breaks on Friday, and I have to rejigger the structure of the show. Friday news dumps, they call them. Yeah, they're not much dumpy. Some of these stories are not breaking on Friday because they are trying to be hidden, thinking nobody is paying attention before a weekend. So yesterday's huge, possibly election game-changing news is that the Darth Vader for Democrats himself, Dick Cheney, the conservative, is endorsing Democratic candidate Kamala Harris for president. And boy, were the hell freezing over memes abundant on social media after that broke. Now, this shouldn't have been a total surprise, given how his daughter Liz Cheney seems to hate Donald Trump more than a tax increase. But it's still an amazing development and just adds to the notion of ETTD. And my listeners out there, the ones that are really savvy, know what ETTD stands for, which is everything Trump touches dies. And that phrase was coined by Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project. In this case, Trump is slowly but surely killing his own MAGA movement, and he might actually help resurrect a normal functioning Democratic Party. if not right away, at least perhaps by 2028 or 2030 midterm season. The great news, folks, about the Cheneys embracing Kamala Harris, along with all the Republicans that spoke so powerfully for democracy and patriotism at the Democratic National Convention, is that a broad-based, non-partisan, pro-democracy coalition is developing, and its standard bearer is Kamala Harris. And on top of this, the Harris campaign, get this, raised 3 times more money than the Trump campaign did just in August alone. In fact, Kamala Harris's coffers are so full, she is contributing millions to Democratic races down ballot to help ensure Democrats win the House and the Senate, and perhaps even take over some state houses, like Arizona, perhaps, which is very close. News also broke on Friday that almost 90 leaders of major corporations and companies were endorsing Harris, including Rupert Murdoch's son, James, who is the good Murdoch son. The other son, Lachlan, is the one who wants to walk in his father's greedy propagandistic footsteps. Here are some of the other names who have come out for Kamala. Billionaire Mark Cuban, Irvin Magic Johnson, the iconic basketball player, Laurene Jobs, the widow of Steve Jobs, along with the former heads of American Express, Starbucks, and Yahoo. The crazy positive momentum of the Kamala Harris juggernaut should take off even more after Tuesday night, when Trump completely humiliates himself in the debate against Kamala. And if you think the Biden-Trump debate was a game changer, as one of my legendary entertainment heroes, Al Jolson, was famous for saying, folks, you ain't seen nothing yet. The only question after that debate on Tuesday will be how much of a lead Harris gains on Trump in the post-debate polling. And by the way, next Saturday on the Patriotic Progressive, do you think I may be talking a little bit about the debate on that show? Oh man, I can't wait. I'm gonna have to get a really good guest in the studio to talk about that debate with me. Another huge story that broke this week, and one that should become even bigger with time, is Attorney General Merrick Garland's Justice Department going after so-called right-wing influencers doing the disinformation work for Vladimir Putin. The new allegations laid out by the Justice Department are staggering. As the Associated Press reported, quote, they have millions of followers online. They have been major players in right-wing political discourse since Donald Trump was president. And they worked unknowingly for a company that was a front for a Russian influence operation, according to U.S. prosecutors. An indictment filed Wednesday alleges a media company linked to 6 conservative influencers, including well-known personalities Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Betty Johnson, was secretly funded by Russian state media employees to churn out English language videos that were often consistent with the Kremlin's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions in order to weaken U.S. opposition to Russian interests, like its war in Ukraine. Surprise, surprise. Okay, all you Trump supporters out there, if any of them are listening, tell us again that you're absolutely sure Russia didn't interfere in the 2016 presidential election, as the Mueller report told us was a fact. I'm going to bring in another one of my guest quotes now. It's the author Anand Giridharadas from his Substack newsletter, The Ink. Here's what Anand wrote in his Substack newsletter. Quote, here's the thing. The actual influencing achieved by the Russians is the sideshow. What is important about this story is the following things it tells us about us. You are being manipulated to hate your neighbors. You are being manipulated to be more inflammatory. You are being manipulated to write off other people. You are being manipulated to think divisions are unbridgeable. You are being manipulated to hate people. To be clear, Americans have shown themselves to be very good at behaving in these ways on their own. But foreign propaganda operations are very interested in moving you ever more in this direction. The Russians are continually doing this, promoting inflammatory social media content as their weapon of war, and that is the real revelation. Their results are beside the point. The point is that this is what a hostile foreign nation has concluded most makes the United States vulnerable. When we talk and think in this cynical, hateful, dismissive, contemptuous, all-or-nothing, victim complex manner, we are actually less divided than we seem. And by the way, Barack Obama talked a little bit about this at the Democratic Convention. Anand says, I don't want to overstate the effect of these Russian operations. It's actually a drop in the ocean. But it is the case that many of the most prominent voices out there inflaming our conversations are doing so, even if unknowingly, at a foreign power's nudging. This suggests we may have an impression of our discourse, of our state of relationship with each other, that is not entirely accurate. And, you know, folks, I've been following this sort of Russian disinformation story before these indictments came down for, I don't know, about the last year or so. And one of the things they have been doing, which as somebody in publishing and the media for my career really infuriates me, is they were actually, and by the way, as part of this indictment, the Justice Department actually shut down 30 plus domains that had been created. And you know what a lot of the domains were? They were websites that were mimicking the style and the language of American newspapers. And they weren't even doing it in a way that would kind of make them stealth. You know, it was like the Washington Post something.com or, you know, the Washington Times something.com to make people believe that this was American media and they were pushing their pro-Trump, their pro-authoritarian, you know, their stories about trying to turn Americans against each other. It was really gross. And that's been going on for a long time. And I'm glad Merrick Garland and the Justice Department, you know, finally did something about this. And this is going to be an ongoing story that you should keep an eye on, you know, for a while, along with the other, you know, trials and tribulations that Donald Trump is going through. So in the few minutes I have left, I'm going to talk to you about a few more stories that caught my eye. I want to talk a little bit about some stuff going on in Arizona and in other states. Here's one that I found in Slate magazine online about 2 weeks ago. And the headline was, the local version of Project 2025 is already causing devastation. You know, a lot of people think, you know, Project 2025 is kind of the blueprint or the policy platform for a possible Trump administration should he be reelected. No. A lot of the stuff that's in Project 2025 is already being implemented in state legislatures around the country. And I'll just give you some examples. Slate wrote that outside the sight of the national political press and seemingly beyond the reach of the Biden Justice Department, MAGA-dominated states are enacting policies that implement the same retrograde worldview that animates Project 2025. And whereas Project 2025 proposals would be advanced mainly by federal agencies and prosecutors, these state programs are enforced by everyone from sheriffs to school boards and ordinary systems. The system that red states are constructing works by empowering extreme ideologues and partisans to impose their will on their communities, whatever level of popular support they happen to enjoy. Here's some examples. Dissenters get the right to set public health and education policy, overriding the judgment of elected school boards and expert regulators. Anti-abortion vigilantes and anti-LGBTQ plus extremists are empowered to surveil their neighbors and rewarded for bringing legal proceedings against them. Lax open carry laws, immunity from criminal prosecution, promises of kid glove treatment from police and prosecutors, and pardons when leftists, quote unquote, prosecutors try to crack down on right-wing thuggery, signal to militias and other reactionary radicals that they can engage in political violence with near impunity. I mean, it is really frightening, folks. And so a lot of the Project 2025 wish list is slowly being entered into state law in these states around the country that have majority Republicans in their state house and the state senate. So all the more reason that in this election we have to make sure that this gets banished for good. So that was one story that caught my eye. Here's another one a little bit more close to home. I wonder if you heard about the recent Supreme Court ruling that upheld the law that required Arizona voters to show proof of citizenship when registering. And that really alarmed the indigenous communities in Arizona, who see it as another voter suppression tactic that will affect tribal members living in tribal communities. The native vote is widely credited with helping turn Arizona from red to blue in the 2020 elections, but tribal communities still face significant barriers to voting access in many areas. And Native leaders, especially in the Arizona area, say that the Supreme Court's decision to reinstate the Arizona law requiring documentary proof of citizenship for voting registration creates another hurdle. In a 5-4 vote on August 22nd, less than 3 months before the general election, the Supreme Court agreed to reinstate that registration provision of the law, siding with the arguments by the Republican National Committee and the GOP leaders in the Arizona legislature. The emergency stay allows the enforcement of a 2020 state law requiring documentary proof of citizenship for presidential voting. This is something that's been going on around the country since the 2016 election, where Native American communities in various states, especially in the Southwest, have a really difficult time providing proof of citizenship. And they even don't get election ballots in their mailboxes because they have these post office box addresses that the post office has a very hard time, for some reason, getting them ballots to be able to fill out so they can vote. And the reason why this is important is that in 2018, Native Americans influenced the election results of Kristen Sinema, who was running as a Democrat. She won by 55,000 votes, and 68,000 votes were cast in online on-reservation precincts. So the Native American vote could have made Kristen Sinema a senator. And in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden won Arizona by just over 10,000 votes, with nearly 60,000 ballots coming from voters on the Hopi and Navajo reservations in northeastern Arizona. And with 22 federally recognized tribes in this state, approximately 5.2% of Arizona's population identifies as American Indian or Alaska Native, according to the census, giving Native voters more of a likelihood that they can once again influence the outcome of the upcoming election, which is why, as you can figure out, Republicans are trying to do everything they can to suppress the vote of Native Americans, especially in Arizona. But you know, and I'm hoping to do a whole show on the voting rights situation, because that's a particular big hobby horse of mine. What drives me crazy, folks, is that we have been listening for almost 10 years now to Donald Trump and Republicans going on and on about how elections are being rigged, which is not true, and there's never been any proof of that, when at the same time, for at least going back to the George Bush elections, first against Al Gore and then John Kerry, the Republican Party on the state and national level has been doing everything they can to suppress votes and to nullify votes and gerrymander districts, all of which is legal, you know, until we get the Voting Rights Act approved in Congress after Kamala Harris is elected. It's really kind of unbelievable how much voter suppression and laws that they are trying to pass to prevent the right to vote in this country, which is something that should be made easier. And by the way, I may be a partisan Democrat, a stated progressive, but I am all for everyone having the right to vote, including Republicans and conservatives. Everybody should have the right to vote. You know what should determine the election outcomes? Your policies. You know, if you get better policies, and you'll win elections. But they don't have good policies, and they are outnumbered in the population. So what do? They just continuously try to suppress voting from the constituencies that would vote for Democrats. So that's the end of my voting rant, and it won't be the last time you're going to hear it. Like I said, I want to do a whole show about the voting rights issue. So, boy, you know, I could go on and on about the news, but I want to save some of the big stories for next week. There was one last thing that caught my eye, like right before I came to the show, and this goes back to my rant about the press. Kevin Roberts, one of the masterminds of Project 2025, who is referred to environmentalism as a pseudo-religion, has actually been invited by the New York Times to speak at a Climate Week event. This is the guy that the New York Times got to represent the right wing to talk about climate policy. And in Project 2025, anti-climate change legislation is all over that. So it's just unbelievable, and we'll be talking about that more on another show. Well, my friends, that's it for the Patriotic Progressive Show on Mellow Mountain Radio for today. Many thanks to my producer in the booth, Ryan Thompson. Please tune in again next Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. when we'll again dive into the political scene both nationally and locally. And remember, you can live stream our show on mellowmountainradio.com and hear the podcast version on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon. And by the way, at 10 a.m. this morning, just an hour from now, please tune in to Sedona Life with Stephen Hanks when the subject will be the Sedona International Film Festival with my special guests, Executive Director Patrick Swice and Operations Manager Reba Stone. Thanks again to all of you listening to the Patriotic Progressive for Truth, Justice, and the Democratic Way. Have a great